friends, come on in, take your shoes off, have a seat, and consider staying a while by clicking that subscribe button. It is actually almost 55 today in Indiana, and I was like, there's no way I'm shooting a YouTube video inside. I'm coming outside. We do still have some snow, but you can see it's like melting a little bit, so I hope you guys can hear me okay because of the wind. So today actually marks 1 year of prepping for us. We really started last year during the pandemic, so we are still very new to the prepping lifestyle, and I'm very new to even making YouTube videos on this. As you guys know, I didn't start out as a prepping channel, but here we are. And so obviously over the past year we've made a ton of different mistakes with prepping, and I thought it would be helpful to make a video over this because we have learned a lot through those mistakes, and I want to pass those on to anyone who is starting prepping or who's fairly new in prepping, to save you guys from making the same mistakes that we did. Before I get into what I learned through mistakes, I just kind of wanted to share with you guys how this past year's really changed my mindset on being prepared through emergencies, and what I've learned through prepping that I want to continue through prepping. So number one is that prepping is a lifestyle. It's not something where you just put cans on a shelf and you forget about them and you never think about it again. It is something that you have to integrate into your daily life. It has to be something that every time you go to the grocery store, it's in the back of your head, like, okay, do we need anything? Is there something low in the stockpile? It has to be something where you're constantly organizing and you're constantly just trying to see where the holes are that you need to prepare more in. And it's really something that has to become a part of your daily routine. Big thing that this year has taught me is that we don't need more of things. And what I mean by that, I feel like we live in a society where we constantly need like the biggest, brightest, shiniest thing. We have to keep up with the Joneses. We need to stock our houses with the latest electronics and all sorts of things. And what prepping has taught me, because you're constantly on a budget, because you're constantly looking around your house at what you can and cannot use for something else, it's really taught me that simplicity is best, and simplicity and just being minimalistic is really the best way to live your lifestyle. We've cut out a lot of things, we've gotten rid of a lot of things that we don't use, but we've also gone back and looked at things that are just sitting on shelves that can be used for something else. And it's really just made our lives a lot more simple. It's saved us money, and it's also brought us together as a couple and allowed us to spend more time together, because we're not focusing on things, we're just focusing on being simple and what we can do around our house, as far as like date nights and that kind of thing, to save money so that we can prep for other things, or just so that we're not so stressed out by maintaining all the things that we have. The thing that isn't a mistake that this past year has taught me is really just realizing how much being prepared takes the panic and anxiety out of an emergency situation. An example for you guys, we had a really bad snowstorm last weekend. We got the most snow that we have gotten in years, and it actually knocked out our power and our water. And normally before, I would be like, oh my gosh, like, how are we gonna cook? How are we gonna have water to drink? How are we gonna shower? How are we gonna keep ourselves warm? And because we have grown a stockpile, we had a heat source. So we had water storage built up where I didn't have to worry about those things. And it just took the panic out of the situation. I could really just like, take a deep breath and just focus on what I needed to get out of the garage, instead of focusing on how am I going to get to the store, like how am I going to keep myself safe in like the mobs at the store, because we've all seen videos of like people freaking out and like grabbing things off shelves. Like, I didn't have to put myself in that situation. We were prepared. And so it really just showed me like how this lifestyle can really make life so much more simple, like I said in my last point, but also taking the panic out of situations where you don't have to be like all scatterbrained and like worried where your meal is going to come from, where your water is going to come from. You can really take a deep breath and slow down and know that you're okay because you prepared for those situations. Okay, so let's get into what I learned over the last year through mistakes. Number one was joining the prepping lifestyle during a pandemic. So because we hadn't prepped prior to the pandemic and we weren't being proactive, it forced us to be reactive, which is exactly what you don't want to be in an emergency situation. A lot of people think because we've gotten so accustomed to stores always being open, to restaurants always being open, that we would never have a situation to where we wouldn't have access to food. Or I was watching news interviews this last week with what's going on in Texas about people not having heat and electricity, and a lot of people are like, how could this ever happen? And I think it's because we in America are lucky, we're privileged, we've become so accustomed to this lifestyle of just of having electricity and having food all the time that we don't know, you know, what's going to happen, or we don't know that something could happen. And I think this last year has not only proved that something can happen, but something will happen. So really the lesson that this last year has taught me is that I always want to be prepared. I always want to have food and water and a way to shelter myself, no matter if it looks like an emergency situation is happening or not. The second mistake that we made this last year, and that this last year has taught me, is to not prepare for every situation, every emergency, and every need all at once. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with our first mistake, but we didn't really have any other choice because we were panic buying with everybody else in the middle of the pandemic. And this not only caused us to get too much of something or not enough of something, but it caused us to waste a lot of money, and it cost us to waste just a lot of time stressing about things because we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't really know what we should be buying. Whereas if we would have already been prepared, if we would have been buying things little by little, you know, we would have had exactly what we needed, and we wouldn't have had to waste so much money on things that honestly spoiled before we could use them. I will be giving more advice on what I would buy if you're first starting out, but that will be in another video. The third thing that I learned over this next year is not organizing, not having a list, and not having a place for our preps. So because we panic bought, we literally have prepping stuff all over our house. It's not organized. Honestly, if an emergency situation happened, I probably wouldn't know where half of it is. And so my advice would be, if I could go back and tell myself, is to create a designated place for our stockpile, to create a designated room where I could organize and actually have like an inventory of things so I know what's in there, and to just have it all together. That way, in an actual emergency situation, things are useful and you know exactly right where they're at. Fourth mistake that we made is buying too much water bottles and water jugs versus just buying water filters. Now, we do have a ton of water stacked up, which we will be using. We hike a lot, we camp a lot, so it's not going to go to waste. But I don't know if a lot of people know this or not, water does have an expiration date. If it sits in those plastic water bottles too long, it can contaminate the water. The plastic will leak into the water and it will become toxic and it won't become good to drink. And so I really wish, instead of panic buying and buying a bunch of water bottles, that we would have just taken the time to try and buy water filters. I know at the time, because of the pandemic, it was really hard to get water filters, but now it should be easy. And like I keep saying, if we are prepared, it shouldn't be hard to find. And so I really wish we would have stocked up more water filters, less water. Next one is kind of the same thing, but we stocked up on too much canned food and not enough on long-term food storage. So canned food has a shelf life of about 2 years. You might be able to squeeze a little bit out longer because of all the preservatives they put in it, but long-term food, emergency food, can last 10, 20, some even 50 years. And so those are a lot more, even though they're quite pricey, which is exactly why we didn't go with them at first. But in the long run, you're going to save money because you're not throwing out all this canned food that you didn't use. I mean, we stocked so much canned food because, again, I just didn't know what I was doing. We're actually going to be probably donating a good third of it to the food bank because I know they're really suffering right now. There's more in there that we can eat before it gets expired, but I would really recommend starting to stockpile more of the long-term food and not the canned food. Sixth mistake that we made is focusing too much on bugging out versus bugging in. So a lot of the times when you think of an SHTF situation, a lot of people are going to be talking about bug out bags and bugging out and like having a bug out plan. But really, the more I read and the more I do research on, bugging out should be your last resort. I mean, there is so much that could happen if you were bugging out. You're in the elements, you don't really know where your food source is, versus bugging in as long as possible, hunkering down, protecting your home, protecting the food storage that you have. I mean, obviously you can store a lot more food in a house than you can carrying on your back. And so I would really suggest first focusing on bugging in versus bugging out. It will save you a lot of money. Your brain won't be like going in two different directions. And I just think it is a much safer plan to bug in as long as you possibly can before bugging out. Seventh mistake, and something we're just now starting to do, is being afraid to talk about prepping with our friends and family. So for the longest time, we thought people were gonna think we were crazy. We thought, you know, people are gonna be like, wow, you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're a tinfoil head, or all the general comments you hear about preppers. And the thing that we found is the more and more we talked about it, the more and more we found that people, especially right now during this time period, are prepping themselves and they're preparing themselves. And the more I do research on it, if we were in a true SHTF situation, or even an emergency situation, in any situation where we're not functioning like we're used to, we're gonna need help. We're gonna need community. You can't guard your house at all hours of the night, or your land, or whatever. And I think the more community you build, the safer you're going to be. I think the old saying, there's safety in numbers, is true. And so I think it's really important to share with your friends and family about prepping, not only because of that, but also because if they do come to your house, if they do have to try to hunker down with you, you want them to be prepared too. You don't want to have to stockpile a bunch of food for them. You want them to be prepared and bringing food and water for themselves, so that you guys can last a lot longer and not be fighting over resources. Last thing that we learned this year is that you can never be fully prepared. So we, like I said at the beginning of this video, really tried to stockpile for every type of situation. And the more we get into it, the more situations we come across, the more we're like, oh, we need this or we need that. And it's like a never ending thing. And that goes back to prepping also being a lifestyle that you're just going to constantly have to be adding to your preps. And so the biggest advice I can give for this mistake is to just not stress about it. Just make it a part of like your everyday routine, like your workout, or like, you know, your food prepping, or whatever you do on your daily routine. Make it like that. Don't make it stressful. Make it fun. View it as you're preparing your family as best as you can with the knowledge and the resources that you have now. Let me know what mistakes you guys made in your first year prepping, and what, you know, you learned through those mistakes. Also, let me know what kind of videos you guys would like in the future in the comment section down below. Make sure you give this video a big thumbs up. It's free, it only takes a second, and it really helps this channel out. And I will see you guys all in my next one. Bye.